Speaker.
I call Fletcher Tabuto.
Thank you, sir. This debate is a question that is about honesty and it is about integrity. And I sat there listening with earnest interest at what the Minister had to contribute to this debate. I wanted to understand how he was going to explain the situation to the House. But, sir, I was busy listening and the Minister literally had no reply to the issue that we are talking about under urgency as of this moment. Literally nothing, sir. And it was an abuse of a member who has not had control of those ministerial reins for over 11 years, and yet he felt it was topical to talk about that now and drag it up and somehow cast aspersions on someone who had nothing to do with this farce, Mr. Speaker. So the reply did attempt to finally get around to spinning numbers, but that's what it came down to in the end. It was an attempt to spin statistics. We saw that a lot in the House this afternoon during question time, actually. Whenever we asked a minister a question, an earnest question about what they were doing with education, the police, the prisons, we got spun numbers, sir. And to ask this government now to talk to this House, to talk to the people of New Zealand with honesty and integrity seems now to be too much to ask of this government, and it's truly upsetting to see. There have been calls for the Minister to resign, and I'm sure the caucus will agree with me when we say we fully endorse those calls. Yeah, but actually, Mr. Speaker, it shouldn't be a question about whether that minister is going to resign. The question now should be whether the Prime Minister will get some guts, stand up and actually hold that minister to account for the failings that he is allowed to be perpetrated under his watch and under, actually more than his watch, under his discretion and his direction, Mr. Speaker. It's been a travesty and there has been no attempt to reply and to show accountability for their actions. At least I'll concede the Minister got it right when he described the situation in previous statements as a severe bungle, but that's all he seems to be willing to admit. So this is a $24 million refit. It's a debacle coupled with the payroll issue from another minister we've often heard about in this House. What we were concerned to hear about today and what has come to light is how Cabinet decided that, well, Treasury didn't need to be a part of this process. For some reason, it was good enough for the Ministry of Health and the Ministry of Finance to sidestep procedure and undertake this process themselves. So what we've discovered, sir, is that we've got this $18 million commitment over 15 years. So we're talking about more than $1 million a year in financial commitments to offset this mistake, this failing of this minister. And what was upsetting to note was that the Minister denies that this will affect New Zealanders and their health care. Sir, I put it to the Minister that it doesn't matter how he labels the title of the budget, it doesn't matter what budget he says the money is coming from, New Zealanders and their health care will be undermined by the lack of funds now available to the health care budget. And that is the bottom line when it comes to money and what the reality is in this situation right now. I mentioned that they delegated responsibility to the Minister of Finance and the Minister of Health. Treasury clearly highlighted, sir, they said it. They said that it was the Cabinet that had sidestepped correct procedure. But I'm sure Stephen Joyce is not surprised at all of this stuff and the stuff-ups that have been occurring. He's seen it happen under his super leadership. His rule almost continuously has seen these kind of mistakes and stuff-ups. And so I'm personally not surprised to see that transfer into Cabinet procedure. And now we see this come to fruit now, which is completely unacceptable. Sir, these ministers have made mistakes. And I note here that the Treasury Secretary, Mr Malclough, the new bid for funding brings into question the governance and financial management practices of the ministry. He goes on to say, sir, that, and they went on to say that Treasury had no confidence that the failures would not happen again.
Yeah, that's right.
Absolutely no confidence that this would not happen again. And sir, we say to Treasury there's probably a reason why they have no confidence that this will not happen again. And I simply look to those people sitting on the other side of this House. Sir, no, I won't say that. Neither should it be a surprise to the New Zealand public that these mistakes, and more than mistakes, I describe it politely as a mistake. There seems to have been deliberate action here on the part of the Cabinet on behalf of the ministers to essentially, I put it to the House, cover up this issue. So what then upsets the New Zealand First Caucus, and we asked the government, what were you thinking, was that they didn't go to the Auditor General to look at the accounts. They didn't call up the one body that could hold them publicly to account for this financial stuff up. No, sir, they called up a private consulting firm to audit the books. A private consulting firm. Sir, this is unacceptable and an insult to this Parliament and an insult to the people of New Zealand. But let's take a note of some of the feedback that PwC actually gave in their report. And I'll just briefly say that the report can be summed up by saying that this was failures of governance, of failures of capital planning, of documentation and reporting. So the findings by the private consultants were damning even of themselves, but the fact that the Auditor General was not called on is completely unacceptable. So the people of Dunedin have been literally crying out for years for this upgrade to their physical asset for this health facility. This Minister of Finance and this Minister of Health have failed them. They now must suffer the indignity of those conditions for years to come because of this mistake and with no one owning up to it. It's unacceptable. The arrogance, the temerity, sir. Just today we were told of police not doing their job by the Minister herself, and yet she refused to admit that the police, for example, were being underfunded. It seems to be practice of passing the buck, and it seems to be everyone else's fault. So we on the opposition are not just surprised to discover the ministers have failed to do this very simple job. Not only have they failed to do the job, but they've deliberately gone out of their way to ensure that they were not held accountable for it. And for that, the accountability needs to be much more severe and greater than it ever would have been in the first instance. Yeah. Sir, I finish by saying that people looking for healthcare, people who need the support of this government have been let down. People will miss out on their healthcare services, and it is unacceptable, and this government and those ministers need to own up to their mistakes. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.